At brunch that morning, my mother smirked across the table and said, "You're lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." My Aunt Mimosa in hand added, "Let him feel special." I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, finished my coffee, and let their words sink in like ice water. They thought I'd swallow it the same way I'd swallowed years of jabs, jokes, and casual cruelty. But that night, I quietly began dismantling the web they'd trapped me in one account, one property, one lifeline at a time. They had no idea what was coming or how silent revenge could be. Before we begin, where are you watching from, and how old are you? Please subscribe to TVH Stories to hear more great stories. Brunch with my family was never about connection, it was about performance. The dining room looked like it had been staged for a lifestyle magazine, linen napkins folded into perfect triangles, champagne flutes lined up like soldiers, and an expensive candle burning in the corner just for show. I sat down at the only place setting without a name card, a silent reminder of my place in their hierarchy. My brother Jack raised his glass in a mock toast, smirking as he said, "Finally earned a seat at the grown-ups table, huh?" A few chuckles rolled around the table, each one landing heavier than the last. I didn't bite. Years of experience had taught me that reacting only fed them more material. I poured myself coffee and stared at the steam, pretending it was enough to fill the silence. Then, with that practiced air of superiority, my mother leaned back in her chair and let her eyes sweep over me like she was appraising a bargain bin find. "You're lucky we even include you," she said, each word dripping with condescension. "Pity goes a long way." The table went quiet for a heartbeat, but it wasn't shock, it was satisfaction. My aunt broke the pause by sipping her mimosa and adding, "Let him feel special." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, the kind that's meant to dig under your skin. I felt the sting, of course. I always did. But instead of letting it show, I smiled. Not the warm kind of smile, but the polite, hollow one that says, "You'll regret this." I took another sip of coffee, finished my eggs, and let them keep talking about Jack's promotion and his new car as if I weren't there. Every jab, every dismissive glance, every reminder that I was the family's favorite punching bag, they thought it was harmless fun. They thought I was harmless. Inside, though, something shifted. I'd endured their snide comments and casual disrespect for years, mostly because it was easier than confronting the ugly truth they didn't value me, only what I could provide. I was the one who picked up the tab when someone forgot their wallet, the one who bailed them out when bills went unpaid, the one who kept the family cabin afloat when Dad nearly lost it back in 2009. And yet, in their eyes, I was still an afterthought. That morning, I realized the only reason they invited me to brunch was because they needed a target, someone to ridicule between sips of champagne. They didn't know it yet, but the version of me that tolerated this was gone. I was done letting them use me for sport and security. My silence that day wasn't submission, it was strategy. I left brunch without a scene, just a polite goodbye that probably reinforced their belief that I'd taken it on the chin yet again. But as I walked to my car, the decision was already made. I wasn't going to shout or demand an apology. I was going to remove myself from their lives in the one way they'd never see coming, by pulling every string they'd tied to me until the whole web collapsed. For as long as I could remember, my role in the family had been the same: quiet provider, silent fixer, the one who filled the gaps no one else cared to notice until it was too late. At gatherings, I wasn't there to be included. I was there to be convenient. If the check came and there were suddenly missing wallets, I covered it. If the utility bills for the cabin fell behind, I paid them. When Jack's ill-conceived investment nearly left him with a criminal record, I made it go away with a wire transfer and a promise to myself that it was the last time. Of course it never was. They liked to paint me as the least accomplished one in the family, a convenient narrative that let them overlook just how much they leaned on me. Jack was the golden child, flashy job titles, luxury purchases, and the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about the ground giving way beneath him. My parents reveled in his shine, and my aunt, well, she treated him like the son she wished she had. I was just the insurance policy they never had to pay premiums on. That brunch was no different. After Mom's little performance and my aunt's follow-up, the conversation shifted to Jack's new car, a shiny import with a monthly payment I knew his salary couldn't cover. My father raised his glass to toast Jack's success, and I wondered which of my credit cards was quietly footing part of that success without my knowledge. I tuned them out, letting the hum of conversation fade while I took stock of just how entangled I was in their lives. It wasn't just the family cabin. Over the years, I had tied my name, my credit, and my resources into nearly every aspect of their comfort. The shared credit pool we used for big family expenses was anchored entirely by my excellent credit score. The phone plan, under my name. Streaming services, property insurance, even some utilities, they all flowed through accounts I controlled, though I never really thought of it that way. I just assumed it was easier for me to handle. That's how they wanted me to think. And here they were laughing at me like I was the court jester, oblivious to the fact that the same man they were mocking was the one keeping the lights on, literally. A bitter laugh almost escaped me when I realized the truth. I was the most important person at that table, and they had no idea. The old me might have brushed it off, maybe even found a way to justify their behavior. But that morning was different. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want them to suddenly appreciate me. I wanted them to understand what life was like without my safety net. I wanted them to feel the ground shake the way it had for me every time I bailed them out. By the time I left, my mind was already running through the list, every account, every bill, every obligation tied to my name. I'd built their comfort piece by piece over the years. Now I was going to dismantle it the same way, quietly, precisely, and without warning. That night, I didn't bother turning on the TV. I didn't need the noise. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of my laptop as it woke from sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the login screen for a few seconds before typing in my password. My hands didn't shake. My mind didn't second guess. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction. It was the result of years of swallowing my pride while they drained my resources and mocked my existence. The first file I pulled from the fireproof box in my closet was the cabin deed. My name, my signature, my payments. I'd nearly lost that place once back in 2009 when Dad's bad investments had it teetering on foreclosure. I was the one who rescued it, moving money around, cutting my own expenses, and negotiating with the bank. They liked to call it our little family getaway, but in reality, they'd never paid a cent toward its survival. I remembered summers when Jack would arrive with a car full of friends, raiding the fridge, leaving behind piles of dirty dishes and empty beer cans. My parents would sit on the porch, acting like hosts in a home they didn't own, telling neighbors how we kept it in such good shape. Meanwhile, I was the one paying the property taxes, replacing the roof, and chopping the firewood they burned through in a weekend. The more I thought about it, the more absurd it became. That cabin wasn't a shared treasure, it was my property, my responsibility, and my choice. And I was done letting them treat it like a public utility. I opened my email and sent a message to my lawyer. The subject line was short and final. List the cabin. In the body, I explained I wanted the process quiet, discreet, and entirely in my name. He replied within the hour, saying the paperwork could be ready in a few days. Next, I logged into the shared credit pool. I could see their transactions in real time. Jack's dinner tab from earlier that evening, my mother's latest online boutique purchase, the monthly payment for my father's golf membership. My cursor hovered over the revoke access button. It was almost laughable how easy it was. 2 clicks, a confirmation prompt, and the financial lifeline they'd been tethered to for years was severed. I sat back staring at the screen. Part of me expected to feel guilty, but all I felt was light. I wasn't taking anything from them that was theirs. I was simply reclaiming what was mine. Before shutting the laptop, I made a list every account, every service, every obligation that had my name on it. I'd go down that list methodically, cutting the ties one by one. No warnings, no explanations. If they noticed, they could figure out why. If they didn't, well, that would tell me everything I needed to know about how much they really valued me beyond what I could provide. That night, I went to bed without the usual knot in my stomach. For the first time in years, I felt like I was holding the cards. The next evening, I brewed a cup of coffee, sat back at my desk, and opened my laptop to the list I'd made the night before. One by one, I began dismantling the scaffolding that held their comfortable lives together. The shared phone plan, removed. The Netflix, Spotify, and other streaming services canceled or locked behind new passwords. The utilities for the cabin, which they all assumed just worked, transferred into my name only and set to be closed once the property sold. It was astonishing how interconnected everything was. Over the years, they had tied so many small conveniences to me that I'd lost track of them. Insurance policies, maintenance contracts, even the lawn service at my parents' house, all under my accounts. My credit, my signature. It had been framed as simplifying things, but really, it was control without responsibility. I bore the risk. They enjoyed the reward. With every account I closed or removed them from, I felt the same small surge of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge in the explosive dramatic sense. It was about control, taking back what they'd quietly claimed as theirs while still keeping me in the role of the family's punchline. I didn't send warnings or explanations. I didn't need to. Their confusion would be the first ripple. The panic would follow. Before I finished for the night, I logged back into the shared credit pool to watch it in real time. Jack's card was the first to blink red, declined at some trendy downtown bar. A couple of minutes later, Mom's boutique purchase was rejected. I imagined her face as she checked her phone, then called Jack, who'd be too busy trying to impress friends to care. Dad's golf club auto payment failed just after midnight, a quiet signal that their safety net had been pulled out from under them. I didn't answer any calls that night. I wanted the silence to stretch to force them to sit in it without my usual quick fix. It was a test for me as much as it was a lesson for them. Could I resist the urge to jump in and smooth things over? The answer to my surprise was yes. By the time I shut down the computer, there was no going back. The family credit structure was severed, the cabin sale was in motion, and the threads connecting my resources to their whims were fraying fast. They wouldn't understand at first. They'd think it was a glitch, maybe a bank error. But eventually they'd trace it back to me. And when they did, they'd realize that this time there was no conversation to be had, no gentle nudge to get me to reverse it. Lying in bed later that night, I felt the quiet more sharply than I had in years. Not the empty kind of quiet, but the steady calm of someone who has finally decided they're done playing a rigged game. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what my next move would be. It took almost exactly 2 weeks for the silence to break. I'd expected it sooner, but their confidence in my predictable patterns must have bought me a little extra time. The first sign came late on a Friday night, my phone vibrating with Jack's name flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. 10 seconds later, he called again. Then again. By the third attempt, I switched the phone to silent and set it face down on the table. When I checked later, there were a dozen missed calls from him, a couple from Mom, and one from Dad. Then the group chat started lighting up. At first, it was vague. Anyone else having trouble with their cards, followed by utility payment, bounced what's going on. The tone shifted quickly from confusion to irritation. Jack's messages escalated in record time. He went from, "What's happening?" to, "You're embarrassing me in front of my friends," in under 3 minutes. He demanded I fix it immediately, claiming I was ruining everything just because I couldn't take a joke. I let the phone sit the screen glowing with each new message and didn't touch it. By Saturday morning, the panic had grown legs. Mom messaged about the cabin insurance lapsing, Dad chimed in about the cable being shut off, and my aunt complained that the lawn service hadn't shown up. I pictured each of them irritated and helpless, circling the same problem without ever considering that maybe it wasn't an accident. I stayed quiet, letting the tension build. I knew from years of watching them operate that their first instinct would be to minimize, to act like I was being overly sensitive, to toss out a half-hearted sorry without any real accountability. This time, I was forcing them to sit in the discomfort, to feel the instability they'd been shielded from for so long. On Sunday afternoon, Jack finally caught me off guard, not because I answered the phone, but because he switched tactics. Instead of yelling, he started with, "Look, maybe we took it too far. We were just joking. Can we talk?" It was almost convincing, but I'd learned better than to mistake desperation for sincerity. I told him I was busy and hung up. What they didn't realize was that every bounced payment, every failed transaction, was just the opening act. The real blow was still coming: the sale of the cabin. They thought of it as a given, a fixture in their lives. Weekends away, summer barbecues, a place to escape when things got too real. They never stopped to think about whose name was on the deed or whose money kept it standing. That weekend, as they scrambled to figure out their finances, I drove up to the cabin for the first time in over a year. The porch sagged a little more, the railing still needed fixing, and the firewood rack was empty. No one had bothered to replenish it since the last time I'd been there. Standing in the living room, I felt something click into place. This wasn't just a piece of property. It was proof of how much I'd given and how little they'd ever appreciated it. And soon, it would be gone from their reach for good. It didn't take long for the tone to shift from panic to blame. By Monday morning, my phone was lit up with a string of messages from Jack, each one sharper than the last. "You've gone too far. This isn't funny." And then the classic, "All this over a joke." I'd heard that phrase so many times in my life. It was practically the family motto. Whenever their words cut too deep, it wasn't cruelty, it was just joking. Whenever I pushed back, I was too sensitive. It was a cycle designed to keep me quiet, to make me doubt my own reaction, and for years it worked. But not this time. When I didn't respond, Jack called. The first words out of his mouth weren't an apology. "You embarrassed me," he snapped. "Do you know how it looks when my card gets declined at a club in front of everyone?" His voice was hot with indignation, like I'd committed some unthinkable betrayal. I almost laughed. Here was a grown man more upset about his social image than the years he'd leached off my finances without a second thought. Before I could say a word, he pressed on. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. We're family. Family forgives." The irony was almost too much to bear. In our family, forgiveness only ever flowed one way: toward the people who caused the damage, never the ones who bore it. I told him I was busy and ended the call. My heart didn't race the way it used to after confrontations. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle in. By that afternoon, the group chat was full of passive-aggressive commentary from my mother. She wrote as if addressing everyone, but the words were meant for me. "It's important not to overreact to little misunderstandings, and we all need to remember what really matters." What really mattered to her, of course, was keeping me in the role I'd always played: the fixer, the provider, the one they could mock without consequences. I didn't bite. I didn't explain, justify, or argue. I'd learned that in this family, explanations were just invitations for them to twist my words and use them against me later. Silence was my new strategy, and it unnerved them more than any outburst could. That evening, while they were still spinning in confusion, I took another step forward. I pulled out the file I'd started for the cabin sale and reviewed every document. The deed, tax records, maintenance receipts, each one a reminder that I alone had kept it afloat. Every dollar that went into repairs, every bill paid on time, every improvement, it had all come from me. They had no claim beyond the entitlement they'd built in their own minds. As I slid the papers back into the folder, I realized something important. This wasn't just about selling a property. It was about erasing the foundation they'd stood on while looking down at me. And soon, that foundation would be gone. A few days later, I decided to take a drive to the cabin. It was early morning, the kind of gray, misty dawn where the air feels heavy and the road ahead seems quieter than usual. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't want company, and I definitely didn't want questions. The highway stretched out before me, lined with bare trees and patches of frost clinging stubbornly to the ground. As I got closer, the air grew sharper, the scent of pine mixing with the faint bite of winter still lingering in the woods. When I finally pulled up the gravel drive, the cabin came into view. It looked almost exactly as I remembered: wide porch, green shutters, the same sagging front steps that needed repair for years, but were never touched, unless I did it myself. I stood there for a moment, just taking it in. It wasn't grand, but it had a quiet charm, the kind of place that could have been a true family retreat if the people attached to it had been different. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside and felt the familiar creak of the floorboards under my boots. The living room was just as I'd left it, couch with the worn armrest, a stack of books on the coffee table, the framed photos on the wall. Some of those pictures were of family gatherings here, everyone smiling for the camera. Looking at them now, I realized those smiles had been for show. Behind them were the same dismissive remarks, the same hierarchy that left me on the bottom rung, even as I kept the whole thing standing. I walked into the kitchen and noticed the fridge was nearly empty, save for a few expired condiments. The firewood rack outside was bare, the last logs burned long ago, with no one bothering to replace them. It was a perfect metaphor: use what's there. Enjoy the comfort, and never think about replenishing it. That was the family's way. I ran my hand along the wooden banister as I climbed the stairs, recalling the summer I'd refinished it myself. Every nail, every brush stroke had been mine. And yet, in their version of the story, the cabin was ours. That word had always been a convenient shield for them, a way to claim ownership without any of the responsibility. Standing in the master bedroom, I made my decision final. I'd already told my lawyer to prepare the listing, but now I felt it deep in my bones. This place wasn't theirs to take for granted anymore. The next time any of them wanted to spend a weekend here, they'd have to look for it in a real estate brochure. Before leaving, I locked the door and took one last look at the porch. The fog was starting to lift, and for the first time I felt the same thing I imagined I'd feel when the sale closed: clarity. This wasn't just a property. It was proof that I could walk away from everything they'd built on my back and not look over my shoulder. 2 days after my quiet visit to the cabin, there was a knock at my apartment door. No text beforehand, no call, just the sound of knuckles on wood in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. When I opened it, my father was standing there with a six-pack of beer dangling from one hand and an awkward half-smile that looked like it had been practiced in the car. "Thought we should talk," he said, stepping forward like he expected me to move aside. I didn't. I leaned on the doorframe and let the silence sit between us. For years, he had perfected the art of showing up only when it suited him, usually with some casual charm, to gloss over whatever damage had been done. This time, I wasn't giving him the opportunity. "You didn't answer my calls." He continued, shifting the beer from one hand to the other. I figured maybe face-to-face was better. His tone carried that familiar mix of authority and condescension, the same one he'd used my entire life to remind me that in his mind I'd always be the kid who needed guidance, never the adult capable of making his own decisions. I thought about all the times I'd open my door without hesitation, about the countless evenings when I'd let him sit at my kitchen table, offering advice I never asked for while avoiding any real acknowledgement of the ways they'd taken advantage of me. This wasn't going to be one of those nights. "I'm busy," I said plainly. His eyebrows lifted in surprise, as if the concept of me turning him away was foreign. For a moment he didn't move. He glanced down at the six-pack, then back at me, like maybe the gesture alone should have been enough to earn a seat inside. When I didn't budge, he gave a small, tight nod. All right, he said finally, though there was a sharp edge under the word. Guess I'll see you around. He turned and walked down the hall, his footsteps echoing off the walls. I closed the door before he reached the elevator. Leaning against it, I realized something important. This was the first time I had refused him, without offering an explanation or softening the blow. I hadn't filled the silence with nervous laughter or some excuse about being tired. I'd just said no. It was such a small word, but it carried the weight of years of unspoken resentment and unacknowledged boundaries. Later that night, I thought about how predictable this pattern had always been. When things got too messy for them to handle, my parents would send my father in calmer, less openly antagonistic than my mother, but no less manipulative. He was the negotiator, the one meant to smooth things over just enough to get me back in line. But now he'd walked away empty-handed, and I could almost feel the ripple of that decision traveling through the family. It wouldn't stop them from trying again, but it had set a precedent. I wasn't a door they could just walk through anymore. That same evening, after my father's unannounced visit, I sat back down at my laptop and opened the list I'd been working through. The shared phone plan was already gone, and the cabin's utilities were under my sole control. Now it was time to cut deeper, right into the quiet conveniences they'd taken for granted for years. First was the streaming bundle. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, each one under my name, each one quietly serving the whole family without a single contribution from them. One by one, I changed the passwords, removed their profiles, and enabled two-factor authentication. They'd know soon enough when their movie night or morning playlist came to a sudden halt. Next, I pulled up the maintenance accounts. The lawn service at my parents' house, the cleaning crew that came by once a month, the pest control contract for the cabin, all of them billed to me. All of them canceled with a few clicks. The more I scrolled, the more I found a storage unit Jack had been using for free, the backup cloud account where my mother kept every digital photo she ever took, the gym membership my aunt hadn't paid for in 5 years. Every cancellation felt like removing a brick from the wall they'd built between themselves and reality. I wasn't punishing them out of spite. I was letting them experience what life looked like without me silently footing the bill. For once, the gap between their entitlement and their actual resources would be wide enough to see. By the time I reached the last item, I realized how much of my life had been tied up in theirs. I'd been running a one-person infrastructure for their comfort, a silent system they never even thought about unless it failed. Well, it was failing now by design. The first reaction came the next morning. My mother's text was short. Wi-Fi isn't working. Did you change something? No question mark, no please, just that thin veil of passive aggression she used when she didn't want to admit she needed me. An hour later, another message arrived. Was this about what I said at brunch? I was joking. Don't be so sensitive. She followed it with a crying emoji, then a heart. The sequence was so predictable, I could have written it myself. Jack's text was next. This is immature. You're blowing things way out of proportion. We're family, remember? I almost laughed. Family in their definition meant I was obligated to give without limits, while they took without gratitude. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. I didn't reply to either of them. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet settle in. The cords had been cut. The lights, figuratively and literally, were no longer mine to keep on for them. From here on out, every inconvenience, every moment of discomfort would be theirs to own. And for the first time in years, that truth felt peaceful. By the end of the week, the calls and messages had turned from irritation to desperation. Jack's tone in the group chat was all over the place. Sarcasm one moment, pleading the next. My mother's texts had shifted from passive-aggressive to dramatic. I feel like you're tearing the family apart. We never meant to hurt you. This is all just a misunderstanding. But the one thing I hadn't heard from any of them was the truth. Not one of them had said, "We treated you badly and we're sorry." And I knew I never would hear it. On Saturday morning, I decided it was time to make my position unshakable. I drafted a single message to the group chat. Effective immediately, I have removed all my financial ties to the household. I will not be your backup plan anymore. If you need something fixed, find another way. Also, you still owe me $4,000 from last year, the money I gave when Jack's insurance scam nearly got him arrested. You promised it was temporary. It's been 16 months. I expect it back in full by the end of this month. No interest, no extensions, no exceptions. I read it twice before hitting send. It wasn't emotional. It was a business statement. Clear, concise, and final. The reaction was immediate. 6 missed calls from Mom within the hour, 2 from Dad, 3 voicemails from Jack that started with yelling and ended with him saying, "Come on, man, this isn't fair. I'm in a tough spot right now." I ignored them all. I'd heard every version of this song before: the guilt trip, the appeal to family loyalty, the claim that I was overreacting. This time, there would be no chorus, no encore. By Wednesday, I sent them a follow-up, a simple spreadsheet with one line: outstanding balance $4,000, due date, end of month. That was it. No commentary, no discussion. Thursday night, Mom finally caught me on the phone. Her voice trembled as she said, "You're really going to do this over a couple of jokes?" I reminded her it wasn't about jokes. It was about years of being treated like an afterthought, about being useful, but never valued. I mentioned the times they'd publicly belittled me, the years I'd paid for things without thanks, the fact that I'd kept the cabin afloat when it was on the brink of foreclosure. She had no response except a soft, "You've changed." "I have," I said. "And I'm not changing back." When the call ended, I felt something settle inside me, a boundary that had been missing my whole life finally clicked into place. I knew the $4,000 would come. I also knew it wouldn't fix anything between us. The money was just the first repayment they owed. The rest, respect, honesty, fairness, was a debt they'd never repay, and I was done extending credit. The $4,000 hit my account on a Friday morning. No note, no acknowledgement, just a wire transfer from my father's account with the subject line, "We're square." I stared at it for a moment, not because I was surprised they paid, but because of how transactional it felt. For them, this was closure. Pay the debt, and the slate is clean. In reality, it was nothing more than settling a fraction of the balance they owed me, not in dollars, but in years of disrespect, dismissal, and quiet exploitation. I didn't reply. I didn't thank them. In fact, the transfer only solidified my next move, the cabin sale. They still didn't know it was in motion, and I intended to keep it that way until it was too late to stop. The cabin had been their playground for years, their escape from responsibility, their symbol of family. Selling it wasn't just a financial decision, it was a statement. This chapter of my life, being their provider, their silent safety net, was closing literally and figuratively. That evening, I reviewed the listing draft my lawyer had sent over. Photos of the wide porch, the green shutters, the maple trees glowing in the afternoon light. It almost looked like the kind of place I'd want to keep if it weren't for the history attached to it. But those images didn't show the late nights I'd spent fixing leaks alone, or the thousands I'd poured into repairs while they lounged inside without offering to help. The photos didn't capture my father boasting to neighbors about our cabin, or my brother bragging to friends that he'd taken over the place after Dad retired. Every lie they told had been built on the foundation I paid for. When the paperwork was finalized, I instructed my lawyer to list it quietly, off-market at first, to serious buyers only. I didn't want a for sale sign tipping them off. I wanted the first they heard of it to be when the ink was already drying. Meanwhile, the family group chat had gone strangely quiet. No half-hearted memes from my aunt, no just checking in texts from Mom, no backhanded compliments from Jack. The silence told me they were regrouping, probably talking behind my back about how to handle me. In the past, that thought might have made me uneasy. Now it just confirmed that my plan was working. Late that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee looking up at the stars. I thought about how different this felt from every other time I'd tried to stand up for myself. Before, I'd always left a crack in the door, a way for them to step back into my good graces without having to change. This time, there was no crack. Just a locked door and a new life waiting on the other side. The $4,000 was proof they could come up with the money when they had to. The cabin sale would be proof that I could take away the things they thought were untouchable, and that more than anything would force them to see me differently, even if they never admitted it out loud. The listing went live on a Monday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee when the email from my lawyer came through subject line cabin listed. One click, and there it was, the porch bathed in golden light, the green shutters standing out against the cedar siding, the maple trees, framing it like a postcard. It looked peaceful, inviting, exactly the kind of place someone would pay good money for, and soon, someone would. I knew it wouldn't take long for word to reach them. The cabin wasn't just a property to my family, it was their stage. Summers with their friends, winter getaways, they boasted about even the occasional spontaneous gathering where I'd show up and somehow end up fixing whatever had broken since the last time I was there. They treated it like their birthright, and they assumed it would always be there, waiting. By noon, my phone started buzzing. First, a screenshot in the family group chat. My aunt's message. "What is this?" No greeting, no preamble, just that. Then came my mother. "You can't be serious," followed immediately by a crying emoji. My father stayed silent, which meant he was probably trying to figure out how much of this was already irreversible. It wasn't until an old family acquaintance reached out to my mom on Facebook that the real storm hit. She asked if everything was okay, said she'd seen the listing and thought maybe they were downsizing. My mother, blindsided, told her she didn't know anything about it. That's when the panic shifted into high gear. The voicemail she left me that afternoon was nearly incoherent, her voice breaking between sobs, accusing me of tearing the family apart, saying I was acting like a stranger, and repeating over and over that people are asking questions, and she doesn't know what to tell them. I listened once, deleted it, and went back to my coffee. Jack's meltdown was next. He flooded the group chat with screenshots of the listing, the asking price, even the realtor's contact information. One of his friends had apparently messaged him about renting the place for a guy's weekend, and that humiliation seemed to hit him harder than the actual sale. "You have no right," he wrote, followed by, "You're selfish, vindictive, and unstable." I didn't respond. Blocking them wasn't impulsive, it was necessary. I blocked Jack first, then my mother, then my aunt. I left the group chat entirely. The noise cut off in an instant, replaced by a silence that felt cleaner, lighter. I knew what would come next: the guilt campaign, the emotional blackmail, the "you've changed" speeches. But I was ready. They'd built their comfort on the assumption that I would always be there, that my patience and resources were endless. Now they were getting their first taste of life without my safety net, and it was unraveling faster than they could manage. The cabin sale was no longer just a decision, it was the message I'd been too polite to send for years. 2 days after I blocked the group chat, there was another knock at my door. I expected it to be my parents or Jack, maybe both, ready to launch into whatever coordinated guilt trip they had prepared. But when I opened it, I saw someone I didn't expect: Amanda, Jack's girlfriend. She stood there without her usual polished smile, hands in the pockets of her jacket, looking like she'd been debating whether to come at all. "I'm not here for Jack," she said before I could speak. "He doesn't even know I'm here." Her voice was calm, but there was something in her eyes, a mix of frustration and resolve. She told me she'd seen the listing for the cabin and hadn't believed it at first. Jack had always claimed it was his, that he'd taken it over after Dad retired, that he was the one handling the expenses and taxes. He'd painted himself as the dutiful son, the one keeping the family legacy alive. Amanda admitted she'd been proud of him for it. But last week, while looking for a charger in his desk, she came across a folder. Inside was the original deed with my name on it, my signature, my payment records. She confronted him, and the truth unraveled in minutes. Every story he'd told her about the cabin was a lie. He hadn't paid a cent toward it, not for maintenance taxes or insurance. Amanda said she was done. Not just because of the lies, but because of what those lies revealed: Jack's comfort with taking credit for other people's work, his ability to twist the truth until it served him. "I just thought you deserved to know," I found out, she said quietly. Then she apologized, not for him, but for the fact that she'd believed the story in the first place. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd never had a real conversation with Amanda beyond polite small talk at family events. But in that instant, I respected her more than I respected most of my relatives. She hadn't come to fix things, hadn't come to defend him. She came to tell the truth. When she left, my parents were standing halfway down the hall, clearly waiting for her to go. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off before he could start. "I've already arranged the payout. You'll get your $20,000. Jack gets nothing." My mother's face tightened. My father's jaw clenched. "That's not how family handles things," he said. "No," I replied. "That's exactly how this family handles things. It just happens to be my turn." I closed the door before they could respond. Inside, I leaned against it, letting the weight of the moment settle in. The truth was out, at least in one corner of this mess. And now, there was nothing standing between me and the sale, not even the facade they'd built around the cabin. The cabin sale closed faster than I expected. A serious buyer came in with a solid offer, no contingencies, and cash on the table. My lawyer sent me the final documents on a Thursday morning. I signed them at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee at my elbow, the same way I'd signed the purchase paperwork all those years ago. But this time, it wasn't about building something for the family. It was about reclaiming something for myself. By early afternoon, the funds hit my account. It was a large sum, more than enough to make a clean break and still have a cushion. I transferred $20,000 directly into my parents' joint account without adding a single note. I knew they'd recognize the number instantly. It was the amount I'd decided they would get from the sale, a figure based less on generosity and more on finality. It didn't take an hour before my phone started buzzing. My mother called first, then again, then again. When I didn't answer, she sent a stream of messages. "You can't be serious. The cabin wasn't just a property, it was part of our family. I'm going to call the realtor and stop this." I almost smiled. There was no realtor to call anymore. The deal was closed, the title transferred, the money wired. My father's text was short. "We need to talk." "You're making a mistake." I sent him one line back. "The sale is complete. You've been paid." That night, the group chat lit up like a bonfire. My aunt weighed in first, claiming I was acting out, and that this wasn't who I really was. Jack finally jumped in, accusing me of ruining everything because I couldn't handle being the least successful person at brunch. His tirade was so transparent it was almost boring. I waited until the next morning before sending my final message to them: all cabin sold. Title transferred. Your share, $20,000, has been paid. Don't contact me about it again. Also effective immediately, my consent for the family credit fund is permanently revoked. The bank has been notified. Access removed. You are not authorized to use my name or score for anything ever again. Then I left the group chat for good. I sat there for a moment, phone in hand, and realized the quiet that followed was different this time. It wasn't the calm before the storm, it was the sound of something ending. No more just one more favor. No more being the invisible net they all fell into when they stumbled. By cutting off the credit pool and selling the cabin, I hadn't just taken away conveniences. I'd removed the foundation of control they had over me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval or fearing their disapproval. I was done. Sunday afternoon, my door buzzer went off. I half expected it to be a delivery, but when I checked, it was Jack. He didn't look like the smug older brother who used to hold court at family gatherings. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes had dark circles, and he kept shifting his weight like he wasn't sure if he should even be here. When I opened the door, he didn't yell. He didn't even try to fake charm. Instead, he said, "I'm screwed." According to him, Amanda was gone, hadn't answered his calls in days. His lease application for a new apartment had been denied, because without my credit backing him, his own record didn't make the cut. All the guys he said, meaning his so-called friends, aren't talking to me anymore. I need your help. The word need was heavy in the air like he was choking on it. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Where was that idea when I was bailing you out of your messes? When I was paying bills you ignored, fixing problems you caused, and you let Mom and Aunt tear me apart over brunch like it was sport. He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, shifting his weight again. I went on. I don't hate you, Jack, but I'm not cleaning up after you anymore. You can either learn to stand on your own or keep falling. That's up to you. He finally looked up, his expression more tired than angry now. So that's it. That's it, I said. You don't get to treat people like trash and still expect their loyalty. For a second I thought he might argue, but instead, he nodded, once, turned and walked down the hall without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling not triumphant, not vindictive, just done. In the days that followed, the quiet became permanent. No calls from my parents, no messages from my aunt, not even a fake friendly hope you're well email from anyone. The cabin was sold, the payout made the accounts closed. Every tie they'd used to keep me tethered was gone. It wasn't the kind of ending you see in movies. There was no dramatic public scene, no grand speech. Just silence, control, peace. And in that stillness, I realized I didn't miss them. I didn't miss the noise, the drama, the constant undercurrent of being measured and found lacking. What I had now was mine, a life without their hands in my pockets or their voices in my ear, a life where I decided who had access to me. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. And that freedom, quiet as it was, felt like the loudest victory I'd ever had. It's been just over 3 months since I sold the cabin, shut down the credit pool, and cut every cord that tied me to them. 3 months of absolute silence. No calls, no texts, no awkward run-ins at the grocery store. Not even one of those chain memes my aunt used to send every week like clockwork, the kind meant to paper over bad blood with something shallow and harmless. At first, the quiet felt strange, like I was missing a background noise I'd grown so used to that its absence made the room feel bigger. But over time, that quiet became something else. It became space. The mornings are different now. I wake up without the low-grade anxiety that used to hum in my chest, the one that came from wondering which family emergency would land in my lap that day. My coffee tastes better without my phone buzzing with some new request. I've started cooking real meals again instead of grabbing takeout between work and crisis management. The apartment feels cleaner, lighter, like the air itself doesn't have to push through years of unspoken resentment just to reach me. I've picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned. Reading, for one. I'd forgotten how good it felt to lose myself in a book that had nothing to do with fixing someone else's problems. I even started hiking again, short trails at first, then longer ones, as my body remembered the rhythm. Last month, I took a solo trip to Colorado with no itinerary, no schedule, just me and the mountains. I drove with the windows down, letting the cold air bite at my cheek, stopping wherever I wanted without anyone asking where I was going or why. But freedom has its echoes. Sometimes late at night, I'll think about what could have been if they were different people. If my parents had known how to give as much as they took. If Jack had ever once stood up for me instead of letting me be the punchline. If love in our family hadn't been transactional. Those thoughts don't make me regret my choices, they just remind me why I made them. I've come to understand that cutting ties doesn't erase the history. It just stops the cycle. The memories are still there. The brunch, The smirks. The years of being useful but invisible. The difference is, they don't get to write the next chapter. That's mine now. Every so often, I'll check the joint account I sent the $20,000 to. I don't know why. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's habit. I still remember the day I wired it. They logged in within minutes, moved the money, and changed the password. No thank you, no acknowledgement. Just business as usual. And in a way, that was the final confirmation I needed. They hadn't changed. They wouldn't change. The only difference now is I'm no longer part of the equation. 2 weeks into this newfound quiet, an email popped up in my inbox. No subject line. No greeting. Just one sentence. You stopped and I finally felt it. It was from Jack. I must have read it half a dozen times, not because I didn't understand it, but because it was the first thing he'd said in years that didn't feel like performance. There was no joke to undercut it, no self-justifying excuse, no attempt to make himself look bigger at my expense. Just a flat statement like a confession whispered through clenched teeth. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't believe him, but because there was nothing I could say that would change the reality we were in. Understanding the damage isn't the same as repairing it. Jack might finally feel the absence of my support, but that didn't erase the years when he'd leaned on me without a second thought, when he'd watched Mom and Aunt tear me down and chose silence over loyalty. The truth is, I didn't trust this moment to last. I'd seen flashes of vulnerability from him before, usually when his back was against the wall. They'd fade the second things smoothed out and the old dynamics reasserted themselves. I wasn't going to step back into that cycle just because the tone of one message sounded different. Still, his words lingered in my head over the next few days. Not in a way that tempted me to reach out, but as a strange confirmation that my absence had meaning. For years, they'd treated me like an accessory to their lives, useful when needed, forgettable when not. Now, without me, they were forced to face the gaps I used to fill. Jack's email wasn't an apology, but it was proof the impact had landed. That weekend, I went for a walk through the park near my apartment. The air was crisp, the kind that carries the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. As I passed a bench where an older couple sat sharing coffee from a thermos, I thought about how different our family could have been if respect had been a two-way street. If we'd valued each other for more than what we could provide. By the time I got home, the email had already been archived, filed away in a folder I'd labeled unanswered. It wasn't a place for grudges, just a reminder, a record of moments where people had reached out but not far enough. Jack's message belonged there alongside a few others from the past year that carried the same half-weight acknowledgement without action. I didn't need to respond to feel closure. In fact, the real closure had happened months ago when I decided to take back control of my life. The email was just an echo of that decision, proof that sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to say nothing at all. Not long after Jack's email, I got a text from Dylan, my younger cousin. 16 years old, sharp-minded, and unlike most of the family, someone who had never joined in the mockery. Even as a kid, Dylan had a way of watching a room quietly, seeing more than he let on. He'd been at enough gatherings to witness the casual cruelty, but I'd never once seen him smirk when I was on the receiving end. He asked if I wanted to grab burgers after his Saturday baseball practice. I said yes, without hesitation. When I pulled up to the diner, he was already there, still in his team hoodie, tapping a baseball against his palm absent-mindedly. We got a booth in the corner, ordered our food, and for a while just talked about small things, school, the team, the fact that he was learning to drive soon. Then, between bites of fries, he said, "I heard about the cabin." His tone wasn't accusing, just matter-of-fact. I nodded, waiting to see where he was going with it. "They were all talking about it last weekend," he went on. "It got kind of ugly." I didn't say anything, but I get it. Those last 3 words landed heavier than I expected. I get it. They weren't pity, and they weren't an attempt to justify anyone's behavior. They were acknowledgement, simple and honest. It struck me how rare that had been in my life, someone from the family seeing my side without twisting it into something else. I told him I appreciated it, and for a moment we just sat in comfortable silence. I wasn't trying to make him pick sides. He's young, and I don't want to drag him into the mess. But I also wanted him to know that if he ever needed to walk away from toxic dynamics, he'd have someone in his corner. After we finished eating, I drove him home. Before he got out of the car, he hesitated, then said, "You know, I think they miss you. They won't say it, but I can tell." I gave a small smile. Missing someone isn't the same as respecting them, Dylan. Remember that. He nodded, tucking that away in the quiet, thoughtful way he always did. As he walked toward his house, I felt something shift, not in how I felt about the rest of the family, but in how I saw the future. Dylan reminded me that even in a broken system, there are people worth keeping in your life. People who don't see you for what you can give them, but for who you are. Driving home, I realized that my connection to Dylan wasn't about rebuilding family ties. It was about building something entirely different, something based on trust and choice, not obligation. And maybe that was worth more than any shared bloodline could ever offer. The further I got from the day I sold the cabin, the more I realized something important: they didn't know how to reach me anymore. Not in the literal sense. They still knew where I lived, still had my number. But the version of me they'd always dealt with, the one who answered every call, who smoothed over every problem, who stepped in without being asked, that person was gone. And without that version of me, they had nothing to grab onto. For decades, their playbook had been simple push until I bent guilt, until I gave in, then reset as if nothing had happened. It worked because I let it. I told myself it was easier than fighting, easier than watching the disappointment in their faces when I said no. But now I'd taken the tools out of their hands. The accounts were closed. The property was gone. My consent for the credit pool was permanently revoked. Even the small conveniences, streaming services, phone plans had been stripped away. They tried a few subtle approaches at first. My father sent a single text about reconsidering handling the property taxes just this once. My mother left a voicemail about how the washing machine was broken, and she didn't know who to call. Jack's name popped up once with a short message. "Need a ride. Can you?" None of them acknowledged the bigger picture. None of them said the words that might have opened the door. "We were wrong. We're sorry." I ignored every attempt. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew exactly where those roads led. One ride would turn into a weekend of favors. One help with taxes would turn into another year of being on the hook for every bill. I'd done that dance too many times. This was the point where I either stayed free or slid back into the same invisible role I'd played all my life. It was strange, though. Cutting them off didn't erase the memories. There were nights when I'd think about the cabin not with regret, but with a sort of detached nostalgia. I remembered the mornings when the fog would cling to the maple trees, the quiet afternoons when all you could hear was the creak of the porch and the hum of the wind. Those moments were real, even if the people sharing them weren't. I could miss the place without missing the dynamic. Sometimes I wondered if they were still waiting for me to cool off to come back to the table like nothing had happened. But the truth was, this wasn't about cooling off. It was about building a life where my worth wasn't measured in what I could provide. And that life had no room for the old rules. They no longer had the keys to my peace. And once I realized that, I knew there was no going back. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was sorting through mail when I saw it, a postcard. No return address, just a glossy photo of a lake at sunset. The kind of image you'd find in a rack at a gas station, the sky a wash of orange and gold reflecting off still water. On the back, in small, neat handwriting, were 9 words. "We should have done better. You deserve better." No name, no signature. It could have been from any of them, or from none of them. The handwriting wasn't familiar enough to be sure, and maybe that was the point. It was a message sent without the risk of being tied to the sender and acknowledgement without accountability. I stood there for a long time just looking at it. In the past, I might have clung to something like this, treated it as a sign of change or a first step toward mending things. But I've learned that an open door is an invitation for history to repeat itself. This wasn't an apology. It was an action. It was a whisper through a crack in the wall I'd spent a year building. I slid the postcard into the drawer of my desk, not in the trash, but not on display either. I wasn't ready to throw it away, but I wasn't ready to respond. Some doors don't slam shut. They close inch by inch until one day you realize they've been sealed for good. Over the next few weeks, life continued in its new rhythm. I saw Dylan a couple more times, once for burgers again, another time to watch him at batting practice. He didn't bring up the family, and I didn't either. It felt good to just exist around someone without the weight of old patterns pressing in. The rest of them stayed silent. No holiday cards, no birthday texts. And strangely, I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence. My apartment felt bigger, my days longer, my thoughts clearer. I started planning another solo trip, this time to the coast, where I could watch the tide roll in without anyone asking when I was coming back. Every now and then, I'd glance at the drawer with the postcard inside. Maybe it was from my mother, maybe my father, maybe even Jack. But it didn't matter. The truth was, I didn't need to know. Whatever sentiment had prompted those 9 words wasn't enough to undo the years that had come before. I'd stopped waiting for them to change. I'd stopped needing their recognition to validate my worth. The chapter we'd shared, messy, lopsided, and often cruel, was over. And whether they realized it or not, I'd already started writing the next one without them. Some people think walking away is the hardest part, but in my case, it was staying away. Cutting the ties gave me peace I didn't know I was missing. I've learned that family isn't defined by shared blood but by mutual respect, honesty, and care, and without those, the word means nothing. If you're a parent or sibling treating someone as a resource instead of a person, ask yourself what will be left when they finally stop giving. Have you ever been in a situation like mine? How did you handle it, and what did you learn? Share your story in the comments. If this one spoke to you, subscribe, and share. Life's too short to keep toxic doors open. Thank you for listening.